Ya estamos de regreso en 8.8, hoy día ando de Wakanda Forever, ya que estamos de Halloween. Este es mi pequeño aporte al disfraz del día de hoy. Y estoy acá para acompañarlo y presentar a un hombre, quizás el más peligroso o más buscado de Latinoamérica en este momento. Un hombre que ha trabajado muchos años en ciberseguridad, ha pasado trabajando incluso de Google en el proyecto del MAP, es uno de los cofundadores de WebSec y que está con nosotros celebrando estos 10 años de 8.8. Él ha estado en nuestros 8.8 internacionales, así que tenerte en casa nos parece maravilloso. Paulinho Calderón, ¿cómo estás?
Muchas gracias por invitarme. Estoy genial, genial.
Perfecto.
Desafortunadamente no en los mejores momentos, pero
Estás en Cozumel, has tenido un año intensísimo, 3 huracanes, Bolivia behind you. Es impresionante tu 2020.
sí, no, contento de estar acá y esperemos que, ya sabes, el próximo año nos veamos en persona.
Así va a ser, querido. Te dejo, el escenario es tuyo. Tienes que conversar con otra gran leyenda sobre ciberseguridad en 8.8.
Sí, la verdad es que estoy súper contento de estar aquí con Eva Galperin. Yo soy súper fan de su trabajo y ahorita vamos a mostrarles un video de por qué ella es una leyenda. So, hello, Eva.
Hi there.
How's everything going over there in San Francisco?
It is 6 o'clock in the morning and it is dark.
Uh, we're going to have to work on the time zone as well. It's 8 a.m. here, so. Well, first of all, let me start by introducing you in Spanish for everyone else. Let me tell you something. I had a molar removed yesterday, and I was afraid I couldn't be here, but I'm such a big fan of your work, especially with the stalkerware, what you did over there, and all the malware research you've done. So let me quickly read this bio in Spanish. So
Thank
her
you.
name, su nombre es Eva Galperin, es directora de ciberseguridad de IFF. Y antes del 2007, año en el que ella empezó a trabajar en IFF, Eva trabajó en seguridad y TI en diferentes empresas de Silicon Valley. Obtuvo títulos en ciencias políticas, relaciones internacionales en SFSU y su trabajo se centra principalmente en brindar privacidad y seguridad para las poblaciones vulnerables de todo el mundo. Con ese fin, ha aplicado la combinación de su experiencia en ciencias políticas y sus conocimientos técnicos en todo, desde la organización del Tor Relay Challenge de IFF hasta la redacción de materiales para la capacitación sobre privacidad y seguridad, incluidos trabajos muy famosos como el Surveillance Self-Defense y el Kit de Primeros Auxilios Digitales. La publicación de sus investigaciones sobre malware ha llegado a Siria, Vietnam, Kazajstán, y cuando ella no está recolectando malware nuevo y exótico, practica artes de circo aéreo y aprende nuevos idiomas. Quite interesting profile, Eva.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm just going to let you talk to Eva, and I'm sure everyone's going to enjoy her presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. All right. There. Now, so it is 6:23 a.m. in the city of San Francisco, and I am generally not awake at this hour unless I am still up. So please bear with me. It is possible that the sun may come up over the course of this presentation, which will have some effect on the lighting. But in the meantime, welcome to my spooky living room. So normally around this time, I would start by asking people how many of you have heard of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. But we are giving all of our talks remotely now, and it is a different time. There is plague, and I have no idea how many of you have heard of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So, in order to make this a little bit faster, I will explain who we are and what we do. I am the director of cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I run sort of a subset of people inside of EFF called the Threat Lab. And what EFF does is we are the leading digital civil liberties organization in the world. We are worldwide. We have more than 14,000 members all over the world who send us money in exchange for stickers and T-shirts. And we turn all of those stickers and T-shirts into digital civil liberties. We have sort of three classes of tool that we use in order to deal with civil liberties problems, because the internet is global, it has global problems, and if you have only one tool in your toolbox, you are going to be a very limited sort of engineer. So we have a legal team. EFF started out primarily as a legal organization in the United States in 1990, which means that we just turned 30 years old. EFF is a millennial. It eats a lot of avocado toast and cannot afford a house. So we have been doing law for 30 years. I have not been doing law for any of that time, and have definitely not been doing anything for 30 years. But EFF was involved in many of the very early cases in the United States having to do with your data and with your increasingly digital lives. One of the things that's really changed in the last 30 years is that our work used to be considered a sort of niche. This was a thing for nerds. And the big change that we've seen in the last 30 years is that every single one of our issues is now at the center of people's lives, because your digital life and your real life are not different anymore, and pretending that they are is a waste of time. So things that our legal team has done in the past that are kind of important. Our legal team won a case in the United States that got the ruling that your email deserves the same Fourth Amendment constitutional protections as your physical mail in your mailbox. Later, the third-party doctrine came along and essentially eviscerated this, because we do not own our own mail servers. We tend to use mail servers and mail services used by someone else, and then the Fourth Amendment right is theirs. So as we all know, there is no cloud. There is only somebody else's computer. EFF also sued both Verizon, oh sorry, not Verizon, we sued AT&T and also the US government back in 2006 over its warrantless wiretapping program. So the NSA set up secret rooms in telcos all over the United States, copied everybody's data, and used it in order to spy on their communications, whether they were Americans or not. Now, I am of the opinion that I take a sort of human rights-based approach to internet freedom, which is to say that every single person on Earth deserves privacy, and they deserve a certain amount of security and free speech. The NSA does not agree with me, and their mandate is essentially that they may spy on anyone outside of the United States, but that Americans are a special class of people, and if they want to do domestic spying, it is in fact much harder. And so we spent a bunch of time and a series of lawsuits working on proving that this is unconstitutional. Most of this program has been eviscerated, but we don't know what kind of programs have replaced it, so that's pretty disturbing. There was, in 2013, a leak by some guy named Edward Snowden, who released a bunch of documents having to do with this case. In fact, it was the very first document that Snowden leaked was a document from Verizon having to do with their deal with the NSA. And we filed a lawsuit based on that against the US government. So that's 2013. We've had 7 long years in which to file lawsuits since then, which is fortunate because lawsuits take a long time. We had one copyright case, which we nicknamed the Dancing Baby case, or Lens versus Universal, that lasted, I think, 7 or 8 years. And the baby whose video was at the center of this case was already quite tall and quite old by the time this case finished up. So these are the sorts of things that we do. We do impact litigation in the United States because that is where we have our entire floor of vicious attack lawyers. You may notice that the United States is not the internet, and that US law is not the law all over the world, and in fact, it shouldn't be. So even though US companies have a kind of oversized impact on how the internet works, because frequently American companies control the platforms, the internet is global. And countries do have to take local laws into account. And for that purpose, we have an international team. We have people who are located all over the world, including a couple of people on our team who are focused just on issues in Latin America and who publish on our issues in Spanish for those of you who are playing along. So we have an international team. We have a team of activists, because sometimes the way that you solve the internet's problems is not to file a lawsuit somewhere in a United States court, but to get people out in the streets, to have people protest, to have people sign petitions, to have them write to the FTC. So there's all kinds of stuff that our activists do. And our activists are particularly good at explaining technology to ordinary people, and also explaining the law to engineers, which incidentally turns out to be its own sort of problem. In the same way that I have never met a worse security trainer than professional InfoSec people, I have rarely met worse lawyers than engineers, because for some strange reason we keep believing you can hack the law. We're like, well, there's this loophole in the language right here, and this means that I can do whatever I want. And the truth is that when you end up in front of a judge and you make this kind of argument, the judge is not amused. You do not get points for being funny. So our activism team has done all kinds of amazing things over the years. And my personal favorite is the time that we borrowed a blimp from Greenpeace, and we flew it over the data center in Utah that the NSA has, where they store all the information that they get from spying on people. And the NSA did not enjoy our surveillance, not even slightly. So we have activists. Our activists are amazing. And finally, we have engineers, because sometimes you can solve the problem by building a tool. Not always. In fact, most of the time, no. Most of the time when people look at a problem and they say we should build an app for that, they're wrong. But every once in a while, the answer really is there should be an app for that. There should be a Chrome extension for that. There should be a working group for that. And for this reason, we have our team of engineers. And our engineers work on a couple of really important projects. Again, this is where I would look around and I would ask people, who knows about CertBot. CertBot is a EFF project which we launched in order to make sure that you could install SSL certificates on your website and therefore encrypt your traffic in motion. And you can do it in just a few clicks, and you can do it for free, because one of the big complaints that we had about people moving over their websites to HTTPS was it costs money and it's not easy enough. So we said, fine, we'll fix that. EFF also makes a tool called Privacy Badger, which is a browser extension which eats cookies, tracking cookies, because we think tracking cookies are bad. We also work with our activists to publish a guide called Surveillance Self-Defense, which you can get to at ssd.eff.org, and also a guide for people who are in information security and who want to do trainings in their community. This is called the Security Education Companion, and it is located at sec.eff.org. And it's translated into a number of languages, and I think this includes Spanish. So we have all of these projects, and inside of the group of engineers who build web extensions and explain technology to lawyers and continuously tell governments that backdooring end-to-end encryption is a terrible idea, we have a subgroup, and that subgroup is called Threat Lab. And this is the subgroup that I am in charge of. I've gone mad with power. It is really common for people to believe that because I'm the director of cybersecurity that I somehow run all of EFF. This is absolutely not true. I have a tiny team, and we do a very, very small and specific thing, which is that we spend our time thinking about the needs of vulnerable populations. Very often when we talk about internet security, we don't ask security for whom. Who deserves security? Who deserves privacy? Who is being put at the center of this discourse, and who is left out in the margins? And as it happens, in information security, you go to private conferences and you get out on the floor and you go to all of the booths and they're all selling products. Most of those products are enterprise-based. The idea is that the people who deserve security are companies or governments. Governments deserve security, but individuals only deserve security if they can pay for it, which really leaves out a whole lot of the population of the world. And this is extremely worrisome. So the people who usually get left out are everybody who is not rich, and everybody who's not a government, everybody who is not your sort of default white man living in Santa Clara, California. And that's a lot of people. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what the internet looks like if you live in the global south, or if you share your devices in a way that a lot of people do outside of the United States. I spent a lot of time thinking about what the internet looks like if you are an activist or a journalist or anyone who regularly angers governments. Because let me tell you, in order to be a good activist or journalist, chances are you're going to piss off the people in power. And I work to protect the people who piss off the people in power, because I think that the people in power already have enough power. Thank you very much. They already have security teams. So we are the security team for the people who cannot afford security teams. And to this end, there are a bunch of things that we do. One of them is malware analysis. So over the years, we have put out a bunch of reports on APTs that were targeting civil society, journalists, activists, lawyers, usually people who have angered authoritarian governments like Kazakhstan or Vietnam. And we have published reports about this, also Lebanon. So we did this sort of APT work. APT work is really interesting. It's actually my favorite thing to do. Over the course of working on APTs, the person with whom I was doing most of my research, who was not an employee of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, was outed as a serial rapist. It turned out he had been running around for 2 decades raping women. And I read an interview with one of the survivors of his abuse. And one of the things that really struck me in that interview, the thing that broke my heart, was how scared she was. She was absolutely terrified of this guy breaking into her computer or breaking into her phone. Everyone who spoke to the journalist for the story had a sticker over their camera. Everybody was extremely nervous, and one of the reasons was that this guy had, in fact, threatened to hack anybody who stood up to him, and certainly had threatened to hack the women that he had sexually assaulted. And this was one of the reasons why it took so long for the story to come out. Now, I read this and I was heartbroken, and I was also angry. I was so angry. And I did what angry people all over the world have done for many years now. I tweeted. And what I tweeted was that if you are a woman who has been sexually assaulted by a hacker, that you could contact me and I would make sure that your device got a full forensic analysis. 10,000 retweets later, I had somehow started a project. And so I was being contacted by victims of sexual assault several times a day. It was, I think some days it got as high as 12 or 15 different contacts, and it was exhausting. But I learned some very important things from this experience. The first is that the problem was not what I thought it was. And this was something that I really should have learned a long time ago from traveling all over the world and helping to do privacy and security trainings for people in vulnerable populations, which was that frequently nice white Americans show up in strange countries to talk to journalists and activists about freedom. And we think we know what the problem is. We think that we understand the problem and the tools that you should be using and how you should fix everything. And all you need is for us to show up and show you the way. This is absolutely not true. For the most part, I have never seen anyone as bad at information security training as information security professionals, because we are so incredibly bad at teaching, and we're so incredibly bad at listening to people in vulnerable populations, because all we want to do is get up in front of people and prove that we have complete mastery of the topic. And frequently after we give these kinds of speeches, everybody just ends up scared. And sometimes they end up so scared that they engage in what I call privacy nihilism, which is, why should I bother to lock anything down? Why should I keep anything private? Why should I even try? Because the government sees everything all the time anyway. And this is a very dangerous way of thinking, because if privacy was really dead, governments wouldn't have to keep trying to kill it all the time. I wouldn't be nearly as busy if privacy was already dead. So there's a lot of work to do, and it starts with the premise that you can, in fact, sort of carve out an area of privacy and security for yourself. But in order to do that, users need to understand where their data is going and who has access to their data and how they have access to their data. So EFF works on projects that make these things more clear, that communicates them to people in vulnerable populations, and also that encourages companies and governments to engage in best practices that support sort of privacy and security by default. Because you shouldn't have to become an information security professional in order to be a journalist reporting on your government. You shouldn't have to get a degree in IT in order to become an activist. This work is mostly being done by people who are speaking truth to power, and they're busy. They don't have time to be to have an entire security team or to get a degree in computer science. And so the more we can encourage companies to treat vulnerable populations as the center of their concern, instead of being out on the periphery, the better. And the reason for that is this. If you start with an engineer, a white male engineer in Santa Clara, you will never get to the journalist in Syria or the activist in Tanzania or the blogger in Vietnam. But if you start with these people as your users, if you start by centering the experience of people who are in the global South, people who are not white, people who are a part of LGBTQ communities, people who have angered their various governments, then you will have achieved privacy and security for everybody, and that's a much nicer feeling. So there, one of the things that I did as a result of this project that I worked on was I helped to start an organization called the Coalition Against Stalkerware. And the Coalition Against Stalkerware is more than 20 organizations now, from the security industry to academics, to people who are working sort of on the ground directly with victims of domestic abuse. And we are all working together in order to both spread awareness about the existence of stalkerware, but also to change the way that the security industry and law enforcement use stalkerware, so that it's possible to see when this sort of thing is present on a device. And one of the reasons that we're particularly well situated for this is because the kind of software that tracks everything that you're doing on your phone, if you're a government, is actually not that different from the kind of software that tracks everything that you're doing if you are trying to spy on your spouse. And in the same way that I keep telling governments that this sort of extremely invasive this sort of extremely invasive surveillance is abusive, especially mass surveillance, where you're just surveilling everybody by default. For the same reason, I'm trying to reach out to the individuals who think that it is somehow okay to spy on their spouse, who think that it's okay to spy on their kids, who think it's okay to spy on their coworkers or the people that they go to school with, because they're untrustworthy somehow. And this in and of itself is abuse, which I think is a very important point to make. There are a couple of other projects that Threat Lab has worked on that I am extremely proud of. One of them is the Atlas of Surveillance. One of the things that we did was we worked with the University of Nevada at Reno, and we produced a map of the United States that shows you the different technologies that the police are using. And the way that we got that information was largely by searching through through the police financial data and searching through the news, because it turns out that when law enforcement buys a new toy that they think that is going to be very exciting for surveillance, they tend to tell newspapers. So we've been tracking this with great diligence. And suddenly in the United States, people have developed a very strong interest in the way that that local police departments spy on protesters, for example. In San Francisco, where I live, recently there was a set of private security cameras that gave access to law enforcement during a protest. And EFF has filed a lawsuit in relation to this particular thing. From a more international perspective, EFF has put out a project called Crocodile Hunter. Crocodile Hunter is is a software for detecting the use of cell site simulators. And this is particularly interesting, again, at protests, at places where people who piss off governments gather. And the reason for this all over the world is that we bring our phones to protests. We bring our phones with us everywhere. We carry tracking devices around in our pockets. And governments and law enforcement frequently try to take advantage of that. And to spy on your phone communications. So the more that we can catch them, and that we can understand about the way that these cell site simulators are being used, especially by authoritarian governments, especially against their political enemies, the safer all of those communities can be. Crocodile Hunter is up on GitHub. And all of our projects are open source projects. Everybody can contribute. Everybody can make a pull request. Anyone can deploy Crocodile Hunter in their local area and see what kind of results they get at local protests and other sort of suspicious events where they think that the government is going to be using cell site simulators. So these are the kinds of projects that we do. Last of all, I want to talk about what you can do. And I think that that's really the most important thing, because we are a community of hackers. We are a community of people who build stuff, who always think about the future, and who think about the potential impact of our work. And just like EFF in 1990 was very niche, it was just a bunch of nerds. And now our issues are sort of at the center of everyone's lives. The same thing is true of information security professionals. This didn't even used to be a job when I was starting out, but suddenly, when everybody's life is digital, protecting people's information security becomes extremely central to their well-being. And the ability to get around that security is extremely invasive and is often used in order to facilitate human rights abuses. So this is a very deep concern to me. What can you do? A couple of different things. The first is you can join the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Again, we have 14,000 members all over the world. We are not just a US organization. We are not just concerned about protecting Americans, because honestly, why bother? But anyway, you can join EFF. We will send you stickers. We will send you hoodies. We will send you T-shirts. And in exchange for your money, we will work on digital civil liberties, and you will pay my rent. In addition to this, you can contribute to any one of our open source projects. Everything is up on GitHub. Again, I really encourage people to look over this stuff, because it's really important, and because that's an area in which everyone can really contribute individually. If you run a local organization, you may wish to reach out to the Electronic Frontiers Alliance, which is a group of sort of like-minded organizations that is kind of corralled by the EFF, where we talk about digital civil liberties issues in different parts of the world and among different populations, and do a lot of security trainings. So there's EFA, and then finally security research. You can publish your own security research. There's this notion that somehow in order to be a hacker or in order to publish research, you need permission. You need somebody to bless you as a hacker, to confer legitimacy upon you. And that's simply not true. So many of us are self-taught and we're self-motivated, and we don't wait around for somebody else to put a crown on our heads and say, like, congratulations, now you are a hacker. The way that you become a hacker is by hacking stuff, by taking it apart and seeing how it works. One of the most interesting projects that I'm involved in right now is a project that looks at the software which is being used by students for distance learning right now during COVID-19. So it turns out that not only are they using a lot of software for the classes, but also that they have special software for proctoring exams. This is Proctorio and ExamSoft. And also that this software is not very secure. And that it doesn't work very well, and it's not even, that it's very invasive and also doesn't do a particularly good job of preventing cheating. So this is one of the issues that we're looking at right now. And every one of you has a community. Every one of you has a group of people that you care about, a group of people that you know a lot about, whose needs you know and understand in a way that I absolutely don't. And go out and serve that community. Think about what they need. Think about how they get left out of the conversation. And this is the most important thing I think that anybody who is attending this conference can possibly do. It's really essential. And my hope is that we can all do it together. Do we have time for questions?
Are you in there already? So great talk. Really, really impressive work. I've actually had the pleasure with working with EFF, and the combination of them understanding law and technology was like very, very helpful. It was about a security research, and I think my question will be, what are the requirements for EFF to work with someone? Do they only work with organization? Can any individual doing security research contact them and get advice? And there's also hundreds of questions or dozens of questions in the chat that I'll be going through.
Well, all right. EFF has a project called the Coders' Rights Project, where we will directly counsel security researchers who, ideally we counsel them before they do their security research so that they can do it in a responsible way that is unlikely to make them the target of a lawsuit. However, we also provide legal advice and assistance to people who are already under threat. So this is one of the most interesting parts of what we do.
Great. Okay, first question then. How do you manage internally all the problems that you assist regarding victims of stalkerware?
You want to know, like, if I have?
I think
do I have a Trello?
The volume of victims. It should be such a large volume of victims, right?
There's a tremendous volume of victims. And this is one of the reasons why I started the Coalition Against Stalkerware, was that helping individual victims one by one is really good work, but we needed to think about the bigger picture. We needed to think about how to solve things for more people, for people who don't know who I am, who cannot email me, who have never read a profile of me in a magazine or anything like that. People who are just afraid and don't have that information. And so one of the things that we've really worked on is getting the AV industry to change the way that it treats this software and to label it as malicious, so that victims of this kind of abuse have the choice of removing this stalkerware, or at least have the ability to know that they are being spied on.
Understandable. So, what do you think, or how should governments regulate the idea of protecting privacy and security of the nation, but then they abuse their technology they got to spy on the same people? So the question is, how should we approach or attempt to regulate this problem?
It depends on a couple of different things. It depends on which government. It depends on how much you believe that a government can effectively regulate itself. And a lot of the time, what you do is you look at the previous behavior of that government, or where the government is going. I tend to err on the side of technology, which is rather than waiting for the government to magically decide to rein itself in and curb its abuses, I try to make those abuses as difficult as possible to perpetrate using the technology by default.
Okay. What do you think is the biggest problem with populations with basically not technology, or basically starting to adopt the technology? What are the biggest challenges there?
There are a lot of challenges there. The first is often just access to tools, access to bandwidth, access to power are all extremely important issues. There was a situation that was brought up to me the last time that I spoke in India, where it turned out that much of the population does not have access to power in their home. And so they go to a shop in order to recharge their phones. And it turned out that the people who ran the shops were grabbing the WhatsApp data from these phones and selling the WhatsApp data of women to men, rated according to their attractiveness. So this is incredibly invasive, and it is one of those things that would only happen if you're regularly handing over your phone to someone else in order to charge it. And this is one of those things that most of us do not think of, because we think of our devices as our own, as devices that we do not share. We think of power as ubiquitous. Unless we're on a plane flight, then power can be very hard to find. So those are the sorts of things that we think about.
Okay. So next question: what do you think about GDPR, respect privacy of data, and why is it so complicated to implement something like this in America, especially with data protection and confidentiality of data?
So once upon a time, somebody asked, I think it was Mahatma Gandhi, what he thought of Western civilization. And he said, I think it would be a good idea. What I think of sort of privacy and security regulation is, it would be a good idea. The GDPR is difficult to implement and absolutely confusing to the majority of the people that I have worked with and talked to. And it is written in such a way that it can possibly be abused in order to gather data on people who are not you. So the way that the holders of this data make sure that they're handing it over to you and not to your stalker ex-boyfriend is frequently inadequate. So I am concerned about data privacy, and I am concerned about the ways in which the GDPR is implemented. I think pointing to the GDPR as some sort of perfect document that we need to implement in the United States is missing the point. We need something which is better than the GDPR, We need that in Europe. We need it in the United States, and we need it everywhere else in the world. And if you don't trust governments and you don't trust regulation, then we need these technologies to exist by default in ways that cannot be backdoored all over the world.
Okay, next. How do you think we can find a balance between security and privacy?
I think we need to stop thinking about security and privacy as separate issues or as issues that are fundamentally opposed to one another. That instead of thinking about security versus privacy, we should think about privacy for whom, security for whom, and we should try to provide privacy and security to the people who are usually left out on the periphery, the people who are thought not to deserve privacy and security, not to deserve tools that work for them, tools that take their lives into account. And I think that's especially important. Privacy and security are not opposites.
Okay. Next, what do you think about privacy of data and regulations? Oh, okay. What are the regulations that governments should adopt to protect user data and privacy?
Again, I am skeptical of a purely regulatory approach because governments differ and their ability to regulate themselves also differs. I honestly cannot think of many governments that I would trust to regulate themselves effectively in this area. I think that the best thing that we can do is implement end-to-end encryption in as much of our communication as possible in order to protect it from being intercepted by third parties, including governments and law enforcement.
Okay. And the last question that we got here is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting in security and I guess privacy as well?
I think that the best advice that I could give is don't wait for permission. Don't wait for permission to become a hacker. Don't wait for permission to become an activist. Get out there and take things apart. Figure out how they work. Everyone is an expert in something. Everyone has a group of people that they care about and that they understand better than anybody else. And thinking about how to protect the people who are left out of the conversation is something that anyone can do. You don't need a degree. You don't need a certificate. You don't need a specific training. You don't need to be working at some Fortune 500 company. You just need to care.
Great. And I think we got some additional questions here. And I don't know if you are very familiar with Latin America, but they're asking, how do you see Latin America in 5 years regarding security and privacy?
I am very hesitant to describe Latin America as a monolith. This whole idea that all of Latin America is the same, that if their governments are the same, that they're all equally trustworthy or not trustworthy. I think that this is actually a very common American way of looking at the world. That there's America and then there's everything else, and also that Latin America is somehow by right an American sphere of influence, what we used to call the Monroe Doctrine. I think this is also bullshit. Everybody deserves to run their own goddamn governments. Having said that, where is it going to go? I am going to cheat. I am going to tell you that I think that in some ways it will get better, in that we will have new technologies that allow us to protect ourselves against spying by governments and law enforcement and abusive spouses. But that in some ways it is also going to get worse. That when governments have power and when law enforcement has power, they tend to abuse it. And I don't think that we have seen the end of those abuses by a long shot. And I think that the people who are listening to this talk are the people who are best equipped to see those abuses when they're happening and to alert the world.
Yeah, tell me about it. I think we covered all the questions so far. It was great having you here. Really interesting stuff. And I
Thank you
hope
so
we
much.
see you in person next year.
That is also my hope. Thank you.
Doctor Zombie, ya estás.
Bueno, ya, lo logramos. Gracias. Paulino, maravilloso.
Listo.
Gracias por el tiempo y la conversación. Me queda claro que algunas cosas, sobre todo en los temas de pareja y lo que es redes sociales, de cómo se duplica la vida en digital, es algo que es un tema que tenemos que empezar a abordar, sobre todo, por ejemplo, en nuestro país, en Chile, donde vamos a tener que pensar en esos derechos a la hora de crear una nueva constitución. Paulino, un millón de gracias. Gracias por tu aporte. Te espero el próximo año. Quiero saber cómo termina esta historia.
Claro. No, ya escucharás de ella pronto. Gusto saludarlos a todos y nos vemos pronto.
Eva, un millón de gracias. Thanks for all. That was amazing presentation. And I've been waiting in Chile. I hope you'll be here soon. COVID, if it let. Thank you for all, Eva. Y nosotros vamos a ir a una pequeña tanda de auspiciadores, a la gente que aporta el dinero que nos permite estar presente con ustedes a través de esta transmisión. Y luego volvemos con otra de las grandes estrellas de leyenda, ¿no, Gabriel? Se nos viene, así que no se pierda, no se desconecte, manténgase, viralice, comparta, avise que este Halloween...
Chris Roberts, muchos años en avión.
Alguien acá quiere contar la historia de Chris Roberts, que viajó mucho tiempo gratis en avión, pero bueno, lo vamos a contar a la vuelta, por lo menos tenemos un espacio para poder agradecer a nuestros auspiciadores y volvemos de inmediato acá en 8.8 Leyendas Sandbox.